All right. Welcome. Happy Wednesday, everyone. So, annual reviews are the corporate band aid that we slap on every single year, hoping that it'll fix our deeper issues that we are just too busy to address. That's right. I said it. And we're going to be talking about this today, right? Now, while I do not expect anything to change overnight, we're going to be talking about some tactical responses that we can have during this performance management season. So, if you don't know me, I'm Christina Green. I'm a generational translator and coach and consultant with Cardigan Careers. And listen, it's performance review season, and today we're talking about these challenges, the complexities around performance management, and how to deliver some of this feedback across the generations. So, welcome to Ditch the One Size Fits All feedback and drive performance improvement. So, let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so the elephant in the room is first, I want you to know that I'm not asking you to coddle your teams. That's not what we're talking about today. This isn't about using, flowery language, right, in order to be dance around sensitivities in the generations. That's not how we are addressing this today. That's not even effective in the workplace. But what I am talking about is I'm challenging this approach that too many of us take towards performance management or even improving performance, right? We treat it like an annual event, and it's like a to-do list, things that we have to do every single year. We also too are, or we treat it like it's a budget line item, something that is tied to a limited pot of money, right? Or we copy and paste feedback year over year, which continues to land us in the same spot that we are year over year. No true improvement, no change in behavior, no change in approach. And part of that is because we're not changing either in this process. We are not evolving. Now, all because we can't recognize that the workforce is actually evolving around us, and our teams also too are responding to that evolution, but our processes are not, right? So this generic feedback is doing nothing but setting us all back and giving us either unrealistic expectations, vague responses, not being able, nothing tactical to be able to support us and how we are actually able to improve in this space. Now, whether you are a leader or an employee, an entire year's performance cannot be summarized in sound bites or even in well-written narratives with good intentions. The system is broken. I think we can admit that, right? The processes that we perpetuate every single year needs to be revisited, and it needs to be revisited through a lens that considers the value of your multi-generational teams and how it is that we can move forward together. You deserve better, and so do your teams. Now, who am I and why do I care? Well, I've spent over 2 decades in various leadership positions in healthcare, and then I burnt out on this persistent corporate parenting mentality. The concept of top down leadership, do as I say, all of this is rooted in generational bias, which has gotten us to where we are today. We've had great gains in corporate America, of course, but this is not going to serve us in how it is that we start to bridge the gap between where we are now and where we are looking to go into the future. Because paying your dues, and that's just how it is, and climbing the corporate ladder, these are concepts that are not evolving with us and they're no longer serving us. Okay. Now, as a Gen X leader, I've seen and I've heard it all, right? I've heard leaders, I've heard teammates, I've heard individual contributors, I've heard executives repeat some of these things that they're so entitled, referring to other generations, maybe who are coming behind them. I've had to work years to get here, and they think that they can just get here overnight, right? So the expectation that it is about how long the race, it's the marathon that they're running, as opposed to the value of the effort that they're putting into it, right? Or what's the point in even providing my feedback? My boss has already made up their mind, or they don't take this process seriously, right? Or there's no growth here, so I'm just going to look for something else, right? This is the performance review season. This is the time when their frustrations on your team really start to rear their heads, right? People start becoming very sensitive in this season simply because you've got a lot of people who are feeling they're going into this season with different expectations, and also too not only of their leaders but also too of their peers. They're looking left and right to see how others are faring through this process as well. So you've got to keep that in mind. Now, we cannot, or excuse me, this is a system of corporate parenting at its finest, right? I talked about top-down leadership, but this is also too where you are being measured against your peers and your colleagues. This is why they are looking left and right, right? Your effort is being assigned a value, a rating, a score of some sort, right? You're rewarded with a token, or that token is withheld as an incentive to improve. Now, every business has to maintain, it has to maintain in the black. They have to manage their administrative costs, and this is a way, this is a mechanism to do that. And there's a way to apply a humanistic approach to performance management that is not treating it like it's a transaction, like it is just related to a budget line item, that these are humans on the other side who are actually producing the bulk of the work that is necessary to keep your lights on. All right. We cannot change this system overnight, but we can choose to show up differently throughout the process. So by collaborating and bringing value to every voice within your team, right? So not just making this an individualistic approach, but also to bringing people together about how things can be done differently, approached better moving forward. You can troubleshoot together and individually as a team. So what does that look like in formulating the plan to that way you're not just repeating the same things year over year, redefining those expectations and the pathways to get there. So this is not a top-down approach. Do as I say. This is in fact can be a collaborative space and a collaborative time where each of your reviews or your feedback is also to reflecting how it is that you are going to support your team. And I'll get into that a bit more in a minute. Because when you help your team to feel seen, to feel heard, and to feel valued, they're going to stay engaged. They are going to attract the great talent that you need to close the gap in your strategic plan. All right. Now, performance review season means something very different to whether or not you're a leader or you're an employee. So look at it like this. Leaders are feeling, they're feeling dread, they're feeling overwhelmed, they're feeling squeezed, they're feeling guilty, they're feeling unprepared, perhaps maybe even biased or awkward coming into this season because you're thinking about an entire year's worth of work. You're looking at everything that is part of your responsibility and how did everyone contribute to that piece? Well, part of it has to do with how you're entering into the season, right? Entering into the new performance year. Are you setting your team up for success? Are you establishing, SMART goals? Are you being specific about how it is or identifying what success looks like, right? And helping to guide your team along the way. Now, because this season is so heavy weighted in budget line items, right? There's always dollars attached to people's performance. And that's what raises the anxiety, especially on the employee side, that people start to feel in this space. Your employees are starting to feel judged. They're feeling cynical because if they've been through this process, either within your organization or others, they're feeling like maybe they either are deserving of a particular rating or that they may not get it. And so they're feeling cynical that, yes, this isn't going to happen. So I'm tired of going into this season with expectations that never seem to come to fruition. They may be disengaged because maybe how things have been going for them, right? They're disengaged because of all the reasons I just stated, but also too because either you as their leader, they haven't experienced you through this season. And so their experience is telling them one thing or the other. Maybe they're feeling hopeful that maybe this is the time that they actually will be seen, they will be recognized, they will be promoted. Now, this is happening across all of your generations. They're experiencing many of these different feelings. And a lot of this has to do with how it is that your leadership has been supporting them along the way, right? Some of them might even be feeling invisible. And that will happen across all of the generations. Now, some of the behaviors, right? So your leaders, you might start experiencing, this is a checklist. It's time to start jumping into, let me just satisfy all of the to-do lists that my company has outlined for me in order to move through this system. Now, you cannot change your company policies, and that certainly doesn't happen overnight, but you can start to lead by example by moving through this season in a way that is fair, not only to your leadership style, but also to that considers the individuals who are reporting into you. They may also too be copying and pasting last year's review. And I would tell you, I've known leaders who've done this, and this is always going to bite you in the butt because you will never keep good talent this way. And you also too will just foster a sense of resentment and disengagement, and perhaps maybe even fear on your team if you're continuing to perpetuate the same issues. And I would also to tell you that if you are just copying and pasting year over year, it's time to do some reflection on your own leadership capabilities and your skills. They may be procrastinating. So sometimes performance review season, they are looking for the organizations, their HRs to actually lead them through this process. When, to be honest, performance management happens every single day. Every single day, every interaction that you're having with your teams. They may be focused on recent events instead of looking at a true full year of performance, right? They may be leaning on corporate jargon because this is not something that they're skilled at, right? Think team player. What does this actually really mean, right? They may treat it like an event instead of a conversation, instead of an opportunity for both of you to grow throughout this process. Now, on the flip side of this, employees actually may start to exhibit some of the behaviors of they're now gathering all of their receipts, figuring out how they can make their case, right? If they've got an opportunity to weigh in on their performance, they will write an entire narrative, right? Their pitch of why it is that they deserve, exceeds, or meets. They'll go in through all of the they'll go through all of the hassle of figuring out, and they may have been tallying this up all year long. And this is great effort, and you don't want to overshine this or dismiss this by completely negating all of their effort that they're putting into it. Excuse me. They may start to commiserate with their peers because if they're cynical, if they've been through this season before, especially either in your company or even with you as a leader, they may not have high expectations and they're already complaining about what didn't happen last year, right? So these are all of the emotions. Expect that your productivity may not be the best at this time simply because people, if you're not managing expectations, if you've not entered into the season in a way that is supportive and collaborative and transparent with your teams, these are going to be some of the behaviors you see. And to be perfectly honest, they may be planning mental health days the day after your review. They may also too be working on their contingency planning. If they don't have high hopes for the type of review that they're going to receive from you, it is very possible that they may move into the space of updating their resume, getting their LinkedIn profiles together. And I'm not saying this to now start checking their profiles. I'm saying this for the purpose of they are getting ready for whatever the response might be. If it is bad, and if there's maybe a promotion attached to it. I mean, to be honest, most people I've ever spoken to, and even in my experience, is that that's not the expectation. I was expecting and hoping for a promotion, but it was not necessarily what came out of that review. Okay, so this is the type of approach. This is the energy that is going into the performance review season. They are putting on their best face to try to see if they can convince you to promote them or to maximize their dollar, right? Help them fill the gap between the performance to recognize that you've recognized their performance this past year. So they're looking for the validation. They're looking for the support in the effort that they have been pouring into this role for the last performance year. Now, here's a quote from Gallup is that only 14% of employees actually strongly agree that their performance reviews inspire them to improve. So if this doesn't tell you that we're missing the mark in how it is that we are approaching performance reviews and feedback, then I don't know what will. So, but why does all of this matter? This matters because when you do it right, people actually start to become engaged. You'll see productivity will be higher, creativity and innovation will be higher. This is one of the most important pieces of your retention strategy. Retention strategy doesn't start when they've submitted their resignation, you're trying to keep them. By then, it's actually already too late. The damage has been done, right? Retaining your best talent requires this holistic approach. We know how to bring them on board. We know how to even, court them during the hiring process. But also, too, it's part of the culture strategy. How are you developing a culture of what? Of transparency, a culture of providing guidance and leadership and structure and helping them to understand the measurements of success? Are you helping them to understand their career journey within your organization? What does that look like? Your performance strategy should be really just speaking to and understanding how all of that is working together. Are they feeling supported as an employee and valued within your organization? The performance review is essentially an opportunity to speak to what you have witnessed and or observed with their performance. Now we're going to get into some details about specifically around the generations and how they may respond to different types of feedback during this performance season. Because remember, good talent stays and they bring their friends. If you don't have your good talent who are referring people into the organization, that means that there is a break in trust. Perhaps maybe they do not trust the organization to uphold their reputation within their friend group, right? Within their network to bring people in. Okay. So the problem with one size fits all feedback is that it assumes that everyone interprets it the same way, and that's just not the case. So first, I want to give this disclaimer is that what I'm going to speak to across the generations is that everyone's individual personalities will completely override this 100%, because not everybody will provide these characteristics, but this is a baseline across the generations. But if you want to get to know your team, ask them, talk to them about how it is that they receive feedback. What elements are going to help make them feel supported and successful? All right. So here are a couple ideas and how it is that the different generations might receive and or hear this information differently, right? So here's an example of one feedback. So you need to be more assertive in meetings. Okay, well, your boomers may feel like they'll accept it as a challenge to step up, right? Now, remember, they've been in the workforce much longer. In many ways are the architects of this corporate environment that we have today, right? So they're very familiar with this. There are things that don't need to be said or stated to boomers because they already understand. They've been in the workforce for 30 plus years, so they understand what this might mean. What does it mean to be assertive? Now, your Gen X also too, they will understand this, but they will be looking for kind of a practical reason, right? So what is the preferred outcome? It's not to define assertive, but really to try to understand how they can show up in that way, right? So to close the gap with your meaning for that for them. Millennials, they may feel judged and they'll look for actionable guidance on how they can improve. So this is not just about providing, kind of a vague response. This is giving them an understanding as to what does assertive look like and how can they close the gap, right? So Remember, millennials are also they are the last generation to be bought into this climbing the corporate ladder. And to be honest, most of them are seeing through the smoke and mirrors and much of that corporate parenting and corporate jargon. Gen Z needs clarity and definition. And it's not just because they are newer in the workforce, but it's because they need to understand, what does assertive look like, right? Remember, if you've heard my other talks, I've spoken about how they were raised by Gen X in a way to be very independent and resilient, but also too to feel very empowered to be able to question, what does that mean, right? To provide, this is not about talking back, right? This is about asking questions so that way they can be successful. They want to know, how do you expect them to show up, right? So does this mean you want them to take full control? Does this mean that you want to facilitate, help them understand what this looks like? So here is an alternative of what you can say. Instead of, you need to be more assertive in meetings, you can say, in meetings, I'd love to hear your perspective more. Your voice carries weight in this conversation, right? So you can insert more specifics, but this is what can start to close the gap for each of these generations. Now, while the gap may not need to be closed by all, this is how you can lead in a way that is supportive of showing up and responding to how your team needs them to, how they need you to. Now, here's another, and I'll go through just one more example. Good job on the project. Okay, so this thing is incredibly vague, but I will tell you, every generation will hear this one differently. The boomers will be like, they will appreciate it. They will not ask questions because this means that they're doing what they are expected to, right? They do not need an awful lot of guidance and direction. They will literally pick up the baton and run in the direction that they know they need to, and they will take every stop along the way. Now, Gen X will feel a little differently. They will want more details, so more specifics about what was the good effort, right? So what does that look like? Millennials, they want to know, why was it good, right? Help them understand the bigger picture. What was the impact of the effort, their contribution to the work that was being done? Help them to make the connections between the pieces that you understand and maybe what they might have missed, because they want to be able to repeat this. Remember, the millennials are about proving themselves because they are looking to climb the corporate ladder. They are looking to gain access to the leadership positions, right, for promotions. Now, Gen Z may feel that this is incredibly generic and they will just dismiss this comment. What does that even mean? Right? It's kind of like the pat on the head. What does this even mean? So here's something to say differently other than good job on the project. Your organization and follow through on the project helped to land it smoothly. So great work. And you can add more detail there, be more specific. The more specific you are, shows them that you're actually listening, you're paying attention to how it is that they are contributing. What does their effort, how does that align to success of the work that you're doing? Okay, so these are just a couple examples, and I can give you more, but I'm going to keep going. So here's common signs that your feedback is not landing as you intended, right? So they may feel disengaged. You may see them withdrawn in meetings. Maybe they're not volunteering for initiatives or for new work that's coming down the pike. Maybe they're quiet during meetings. These are sometimes your outspoken teammates, but they are withholding their contribution. So they're not providing their voice, right? So maybe their body language is telling you that they're just closed, right? So look to these. These are telltale signs, and it is very common for this to happen at this time, especially on the other side of receiving a review, right? They may be defensive in some of their actions, jumping to conclusions or thinking they know what you're going to say, in many ways. And so automatically taking offense to a lot of things. Treat this with higher sensitivity, especially during this time, because people are on edge, right? If you think of the state of our globe, where we are in the world, and also to where we are in our country, people are feeling tight. They're feeling squeezed right now, especially financially. And so This is not about throwing money at the problem, but actually considering compassion and empathy with your teams. If after they receive your review, they just don't respond to your emails as quickly as they used to, maybe they don't pick up your phone calls as often, or maybe their engagement within that conversation is not as friendly or as it has been. So maybe they delayed turnaround times on some of their work, requires some follow up, or they may just flat out resign, right? Because if they're not receiving what they thought, that when you walk into performance review time, if the review that they receive does not align with where they believe that they should land, they're going to hold you responsible for it. And but it also too, it's a missed opportunity, because if you've not had this conversation with them prior to the review, then that's where things are misaligned, right? And so we'll talk about how it is that we can prepare for this season, move through this season, but also to prepare for the next one moving forward. Okay, so a summary to understand how each generation really actually needs this feedback. What is the feedback that they want to hear, by understanding the generation just a bit more? So boomers are prefer direct. Tell them exactly what was missed, tell them exactly what they're doing right, and but make it respect-based feedback that is rooted in experience. So helping them to understand, they already have decades of experience, and so you don't have to explain that to them, but you can insinuate it by making sure that you're calling out the value of their effort, the value of the feedback, excuse me, of their contribution to the work that they're doing. How are they contributing to the bigger picture, right? These are things that are understood when you use that as your framework, as your background, your foundation for providing the feedback. That is how you're being respectful of their contribution, but also to using it as an opportunity to provide some guidance where necessary. The frequency on this one is probably no more than quarterly. To be honest, boomers, anything more, they really will see this as kind of micromanagement. This does not mean that you don't address performance issues as they come up. But to be honest, when you've got people who are just moving along, getting their work done, you don't have to check on them very frequently, because they like the autonomy, right? They like the independence. Similar to Gen X, right? They value that autonomy and practical feedback that is actionable. That's something that's tied to results. They do not like to be far downstream from decision making. They like to be, collaborative or included in that decisions. And so they tend to be drawn to some of these leadership roles, even if it's not necessarily the title, but it's the responsibility. So something similar for frequency, quarterly, or maybe as milestones will dictate. Okay. Millennials are very different. They are growth centered. They are focused on growing in their career and along their career journey. So they're looking for feedback through a coaching lens. So help them understand, this is not just feedback on they missed this opportunity. Help them to see how they could have approached it a little differently and achieved greater success, right? So put on your coaching hat during this feedback, provide them ongoing feedback as work is progressing, and support to help them make decisions along the way. Give them the autonomy to make the decisions, but be their support behind. Think of the riding the bike, teaching your child how to ride a bike analogy, right? You have let go of the seat, but you're there if something happens, if they happen to fall or stumble, right? So be available, but don't be micromanagement. All right. Gen Z, they want clarity, they want purpose, they want to understand how the work that they are doing is tied to the bigger picture. They like check-ins that feel human. They do not want to have this corporate jargon. Do not rinse and repeat. Do not treat them like an assembly line of information, of providing feedback. And they want real-time feedback. And I don't mean interrupt them in the middle of a presentation if they've made an error. I mean, provide them feedback same day, right? Or within a very short period of time. They want to understand, they do not want to waste one single minute on doing something incorrect any further. So I'll say they're more resilient in being able to receive that feedback because they want to get it right. Okay. Now, how do you tailor this feedback without coddling them? Because this is a question I get often, right? I'm not talking about, being overly empathetic to sensitivity. I'm talking about actually delivering the information that is necessary to execute the roles, to execute the work that needs to get done. But gone are the days of just barking orders or handing out vague or damaging reviews, right? We're not trying to hurt feelings, right? We're not trying to, we don't yell at people. We have policies, we have workplace, engagement criteria, ways in which we are civil with one another, especially in the workplace, right? But it's also too time to remember that employees do have options. Even amongst all of the layoffs that are going on, people still have options, and you have to respect that. This is not about thinking that you can keep someone just because they have nothing, they have no better options. Even for the millennials and Gen Z, that is becoming less and less of the case, especially for Gen Z. When you think about the responsibilities or the reasons that people would feel tied or stuck in a job, Gen Z has been letting go of those. They do not have the debt. Millennials have a lot of college debt because of the pursuit of higher education. Gen Z or Gen X has a large amount of debt because of many different reasons, supporting the raising of Gen Z without debt, right? So I won't go into that tangent, but so these are some of the background responsibilities as to why it is that they would feel stuck or where they couldn't make moves. And each generation will approach this very differently, but every generation, every employee has options. And so do not treat them as if they do not, okay? If you want your best talent to stay out of desire and not out of obligation or fear, you need a constructive feedback strategy. Now, here's what this looks like. Generationally intelligent feedback is 4 steps to kind of get there. One is to know your audience. And this is not just their generation, right? I've given you some tools to understand each generation, but this is understanding how do they best receive feedback? And I mean the individual in front of you. What's that frequency in which they like to have that feedback? Know your people. Know the people who are doing this great work on behalf of you, right? Why is it important? What is the best way, what is most important to them to learn from the feedback, right? And then next, clarify your intent. So when you're providing the feedback, give them the why behind it, right? So why does this matter? Or why does the identified opportunity, why does this tie back to something that's more important? Make the connections for them. The aim is to be specific, constructive, and useful so they can course correct and or enhance their skills. Maybe this is an opportunity to continue to upskill them, right? And if so, then that's part of your development plan, which leads me to the next step, which is to co-create what the next steps look like. Because this is not about just dropping feedback in their laps to say, here are all the ways that you need to improve. It's building upon that to say, what support do they need next to be successful? And let them lead this. Let them lead this brainstorming, this troubleshooting as to how it is that you're able to close the gap together. How can you support them in that pursuit of continuing to improve? Because listen, no one is perfect in their pursuit or their execution. So leaders and employees, I want you to hear me say this. You cannot go into every performance review thinking that you have no opportunity to improve. We all do, right? And so take it with a grain of salt. This is not that the glass is half empty, that it's in fact just measuring how far the glass is filled to, right? There's always opportunity for us to continue to grow and to upskill, especially if you're looking to promote and or move into other positions. And then lastly is to be intentional. So adjust your check-ins or your reviews to the frequency that aligns with how your team works best. So To me, I would say think more often than not, and not to the point of micromanagement, but ask your team. Ask them what type of support do they need and what kind of frequency. What does that look like? Right? So make that feedback structured and compounding. So when you get to review season, this is not a let me think of everything that we have spoken about over the last 10 to 12 months so I can try to assess and rate you based on the information that I understand. If you make this something that is documented on a frequent basis, so if you're meeting on a biweekly or monthly or quarterly basis, have an output of of that conversation and a report back as to how it is that they're receiving the feedback. Make this an open dialogue, but give it some structure so you can use this so that way this time next year this is not a scramble. You in fact have been building the narrative that you're going to leverage for the next review. Okay, so that's what I mean by making it compounding. You're building upon, right? Maybe you're developing a skill over this time and you're tracking the progress towards the development of that skill. This then it's pulling the weight off of next year's season to where your employee has to collect all of their receipts and you have to do something similar to try to craft a fair narrative that gives them a fair rating. All right. Now, companies that implement regular feedback, employee feedback, have turnover rates that are 14.9% lower for employees than those who don't receive any reviews, right? And if retention is a problem, is a challenge within your organization, which most industries are experiencing, this is a way to be intentional and structured in how it is that you are supporting your team. And this can be done by every single leader, regardless of what your structure looks like for performance review season. All right. Now, when we get this right, you build trust with your team and they want to stay. They feel engaged, they feel valued, they feel heard, right? This reduces rework. It reduces the extra hours spent. It reduces the friction, the rub that your team is having and how they're experiencing you. This increases their engagement in the work that they're providing. They're showing up fresh and innovative and creative in this space. And this also it smooths out your performance review cycles, right? And also fosters an improved cross-generational collaboration. This makes it easier because everyone is showing up in their best selves and contributing that to your team and to the environment. Yeah. All right. Now, okay, so that was a lot of information, but this was hopefully helpful to help you working through this series this month on how to manage these complexities around performance management, because I get it. This is not easy and it is not always cut and dry, right? But what we can do is we can start to take the effort that is necessary in order to continue to support our teams. Let me make a change here. Okay. Now, because retaining your multi-generational team requires an awareness of your generational biases, and these are the things that keep us stuck in the past. So if you want to talk about how to strengthen, how to turn your generational strengths into, turn your generational differences into strengths, to really foster this team of collaboration, to equip your leaders with strategies that actually work, to future-proof your workforce and build your pipeline, your leadership pipeline, then let's have a conversation. Use the QR code that's on the screen and get on my calendar and let's talk about what this looks like for you. Performance management is not something that is changed overnight. We have lots of hopes and dreams for doing so, but this is not always the reality. There are growing pains. And when we start to address many of our generational biases, this is how we can start to actually bridge the gap and foster a better performance amongst our teams. All right. Now, next month, or actually next week, we are continuing the series around performance management. And we're going to be talking about how to build resilient teams by humanizing your feedback. So we're going to be getting a bit more into the detail about what language, how it is that you can approach your performance review, and not just a transactional perspective, but how it is that we can actually start to support our teams and how it is that they are going to use that feedback in order to continue to improve. So to remove the cross arms and the disengagement that you may be experiencing amongst your teams, but also but have everyone enter and leave this performance review season in a way that feels supported, that feels collaborative, and feels hopeful to how it is that you continue to take next steps. All right. Well, that is all that I have for you today. Thank you for joining me either live or watching this on the replay. And I will see you next week. If you've got any questions, you know how to reach me. Until then, take care. I'll see you soon.